Today, we're stepping into a story filled with emotions about prejudice, courage, and how a decision made in mere moments can shake an entire system to its core. It all begins with Cassandra Hayes, a talented and powerful executive. After months of tireless work, she's finally ready to sign one of the most important contracts of her career. With her business class ticket in hand, Cassandra hopes for a peaceful flight to recharge before the critical negotiation. But that flight wouldn't be as serene as she expected. From the moment she stepped on the plane, curious glances and cold attitudes filled the air. And the peak of it all was when a flight attendant, with a razor-thin smile, persistently questioned her seat assignment in the business class cabin as if she didn't belong there. The unspoken tension simmered beneath the surface, testing Cassandra's composure and resolve. But what happens when a woman who's used to defying prejudice decides not to stay silent? Will her actions be enough to shatter entrenched biases? Follow along as we uncover a journey of turning frustration into meaningful change. If you're inspired by stories of strength, resilience, and justice, don't forget to hit subscribe to stay updated with more powerful content. And how would you react if you were in Cassandra's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Cassandra Hayes entered the airport terminal with a poised yet powerful demeanor. Her burgundy blazer hugged her well-proportioned frame, paired with tailored pants and sleek heels that accentuated both her grace and authority. A small black carry-on suitcase rolled effortlessly behind her with each step, while an elegant designer handbag hung loosely over her shoulder. Cassandra wasn't here as just another traveler. She was one of the few black female executives in the investment industry, and today she was en route to a major negotiation to finalize a contract with Aerostar Airways, an airline famed for its industry-leading innovations. Even though Cassandra was accustomed to business trips, there was something different about this one. She had spent over a year negotiating this deal, and this was the final step to seal it. Yet instead of excitement, an inexplicable wave of tension crept through her as she stood amidst the bustling crowd. The clatter of rolling suitcases echoed along the walkway. People hurried past Cassandra, each absorbed in their own story, families with giggling children, business professionals busy on calls with wireless earbuds, couples bidding emotional farewells. Cassandra stood still for a moment, taking a deep breath to calm herself. She whispered to herself, "Stay calm. This is just another flight like all the others." She headed toward the business class check-in counter. The area was quieter and more spacious, a welcome contrast to the crowded terminal behind her. Still, Cassandra noticed a few lingering glances as she walked by. Perhaps it was because of her elegant attire, or maybe it was the confidence in her every step. But deep down, Cassandra knew there was another reason: the color of her skin. Cassandra was no stranger to those looks. Memories of being underestimated or questioned about her abilities solely because she was a black woman in the glitzy financial world. A world dominated by white men in tailored suits rushed over her like an unforgiving wave. She remembered the first time she stood at the podium during an investment conference in Sanford. She heard the murmurs of sarcasm from a few audience members. She's only here because they needed someone to represent diversity. But Cassandra had never allowed such prejudice to make her back down. Every time she faced moments like that, her determination to prove her worth only grew stronger, and today was no different. Cassandra reached the check-in counter. A woman with her hair neatly tied in a high bun stood behind the desk. Joanna Reed, a senior flight attendant known for her impeccable uniform and attention to detail. Joanna glanced up, her eyes briefly scanning Cassandra before shifting down again. A fleeting glance that was hard to interpret but felt tinged with coldness. Though Joanna had likely checked hundreds of boarding passes that day, her smile lacked the warmth typically expected in her role. "Good morning. May I see your ticket?" Joanna asked, her tone polite but devoid of any friendliness. Cassandra nodded, offering a small smile as she handed over her electronic boarding pass from her phone. Joanna took the phone and examined it for a moment, her brow subtly furrowing as she read the details on the screen. Sensing the hesitation, Cassandra spoke softly. "Yes, seat 2A, business class." Joanna glanced up with a forced smile, as if trying to conceal something. "Oh, of course, I hope you have a pleasant flight." Cassandra felt a fleeting wave of discomfort as she took her phone back from Joanna's hand. She didn't say anything else, but quietly made her way toward the boarding gate. Yet a thought she couldn't ignore echoed in her mind. Why did she look at me that way? Cassandra stepped into the business class cabin with slow but deliberate steps. The space was tastefully designed, featuring soft leather seats and warm lighting from small round ceiling fixtures. The air carried a light scent of citrus and sandalwood, a familiar fragrance in premium flights. Yet despite the luxury, Cassandra felt an invisible weight pressing down on the atmosphere. She chose seat 2A by the window, an ideal spot to watch the sky during takeoff. She gently placed her handbag neatly under the seat in front of her and settled in with a quiet sigh of relief. Cassandra's eyes unconsciously scanned the business class cabin. A few passengers had already taken their seats. An older man in a black suit was engrossed in a financial newspaper. A blonde woman adjusted her silk scarf, and a young businessman sat focused on his laptop screen. But what caught Cassandra's attention were the awkward, subtly scrutinizing glances from a few other passengers. A woman in her early 50s with short silver hair, seated across the aisle, briefly looked at Cassandra and then quickly turned away. A man wearing glasses seated ahead of her even turned back for a second glance before facing forward again. There it is again, Cassandra thought to herself. She knew that look all too well, part surprise, part suspicion, as if they were silently asking, what is she doing here? Does she really belong in this space? Old memories played like a slow-motion reel in Cassandra's mind. She recalled the first time she stepped into the boardroom as the youngest black woman in the company's history to hold her position. The looks she received from the men in polished suits were just like the ones she saw now, assessing, waiting for her to slip up so they could brand her as not up to par. Cassandra had become accustomed to proving that she deserved everything she had achieved. But no matter how many successes she earned, those judgmental stares could still trigger a familiar sense of isolation. She shifted her posture slightly, took a deep breath, and reminded herself, I've endured far worse than this. A young flight attendant, Maggie, approached with a bright smile, carrying a silver tray of drinks for the passengers. She stopped by Cassandra's seat and greeted her warmly. Good morning, ma'am. Would you like still water, orange juice, or some wine? Cassandra returned the smile politely and opted for a glass of water. Maggie placed the glass on the tray table carefully before moving on to serve the other passengers. As soon as Maggie walked away, Joanna Reed, the senior flight attendant from the check-in counter, appeared at the end of the aisle. Cassandra immediately noticed Joanna's stiff demeanor. The woman's eyes were fixed on Cassandra, silently observing her as if searching for something out of place. Joanna walked over to Cassandra, her arms folded in front of her chest. Her voice remained gentle, but there was an undeniable undertone of suspicion. Excuse me, ma'am, but we need to check your boarding pass again for accuracy. Cassandra looked up, her deep brown eyes calm yet resolute. Without saying a word, she opened her phone and displayed her electronic boarding pass once more. Joanna took the phone and scrutinized the details carefully, as if she was determined to find some error. After a long pause, she exhaled lightly, but showed no change in expression. My apologies for the inconvenience. We just need to make sure everything is correct. Cassandra retrieved her phone from Joanna's hand and replied with measured politeness, though her tone was cool. Thank you, but my ticket has already been checked as per the procedure. Joanna hesitated for a second before turning and walking away without another word. Cassandra took a sip of water and tried to relax, but her mind was still unsettled by the small but significant details. The lingering stares, the unnecessary questioning of her ticket, and the indifference from some of the passengers around her. I've seen this before in so many places, she thought. She recalled a piece of advice her mother often repeated. You have to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. Cassandra had spent her entire life overcoming biases like this. Each time it happened, she tried her best to stay composed. But she knew that calmness wasn't always enough to shield her from the wear and tear of it all. As she focused back on her presentation on the tablet, a small, curious voice from across the aisle broke the silence. Mom, she's really pretty. Cassandra turned her head and saw a boy around 7 years old staring at her with wide, admiring eyes. His young mother, looking flustered, gently tugged his arm and whispered for him not to point at strangers. But Cassandra smiled softly and gave the boy a small wave. The boy's face lit up as he waved back enthusiastically. In that brief moment, Cassandra felt a warmth ease the tension in her chest. Maybe not everyone is looking at me with suspicion, she thought. Cassandra leaned back in her seat, her gaze shifting to the window where clouds had begun to gather, casting shadows over the runway. The sky had turned gray, mirroring the unease she felt within herself. The intercom crackled to life, announcing that the plane was preparing for takeoff. Yet Cassandra had an unshakable feeling that this flight would be anything but ordinary. Just a few hours. I just need to get through this flight, she reminded herself. But she couldn't have known that in just a short span of time, everything would change forever. The plane began to taxi down the runway, the low rumble of the engines reverberating throughout the cabin. Cassandra closed her eyes, letting the soft vibrations of the plane's movement soothe her for a brief moment. But only a few minutes after takeoff, that fleeting sense of calm was interrupted by a familiar voice. "Excuse me, ma'am." Joanna Reed's voice came from above her, this time laced with the kind of false politeness that barely masked underlying irritation. "We have some concerns about the placement of your carry-on bag. We need to make sure that all luggage is stored properly to ensure the safety of our passengers." Cassandra opened her eyes, taking a deep breath to control the irritation rising within her. She tilted her head slightly, gesturing toward the small bag under the seat in front of her, and replied in a calm tone, "The bag is still under the seat in front of me, exactly where it should be." Joanna bent down to check and saw that Cassandra was right. But instead of offering an apology, she responded with a thin, insincere smile. "Well then, that's fine. Thank you for your cooperation." Cassandra held Joanna's gaze until the flight attendant finally turned and walked away. In that brief exchange, Cassandra felt as though she had just engaged in a silent battle of wills. And while she had technically won, the encounter left her feeling anything but victorious. Outside the window, soft white clouds drifted lazily under the warm sunlight. But inside the business class cabin, the air seemed thick with unspoken tension and discreet, fleeting glances. Cassandra took a sip of her water and tried to focus on the presentation displayed on her tablet. She reminded herself that it was just a few hours in the air, and she had survived far more difficult situations than this. But just as she reopened her email to review the final details of the contract, she sensed a small commotion at the front of the cabin. A voice rang out, not particularly loud, but enough to capture the attention of the passengers around. "I don't understand why we have to switch seats. We reserved these ahead of time." Cassandra lifted her head and looked toward the source of the voice. A young black couple was speaking with Joanna. Their demeanor was polite but visibly tense. The woman was explaining, "We used our rewards points to upgrade to business class. These are legitimate tickets." Joanna folded her arms across her chest and tilted her head slightly, her expression tinged with doubt. "Yes, but we need to verify additional information. There may have been a system error." Cassandra felt her pulse quicken as she watched the interaction. There was no doubt in her mind now. This wasn't a coincidence. She glanced at her watch. It had only been about 20 minutes since the flight began. But in that brief time, Joanna had singled out 3 black passengers, all of whom had valid business class tickets. How is this happening again and again? Cassandra thought to herself, the anger within her beginning to simmer, but she knew she couldn't act impulsively. Another flight attendant, Hannah, the young woman with the warm smile from earlier, stepped in to de-escalate the situation. She calmly verified the couple's information and reassured them with a kind smile that everything was in order. After a few minutes, the couple settled back into their seats, though the frustration on their faces remained evident. Joanna, looking visibly displeased at being interrupted, pursed her lips tightly before turning and walking away. Cassandra swiped across her phone screen, opened the Notes app, and began quickly typing down every small detail she had witnessed. 7:45 a.m. The flight attendant checked my ticket twice without a valid reason. 8 a.m. Questioned my carry-on bag, even though it was stored in the correct place. 8:20 a.m. Questioned a black couple about their tickets, even though they had valid business class seats. She felt the need to document these events, not because she wanted to file a complaint for herself, but because she knew that many other passengers would never have the opportunity or a voice to speak up and be heard. As Cassandra typed the last line, a memory surfaced from her past. She recalled a trip she took with her mother when she was a child. Despite being polite and patient, her mother was denied entry to the VIP lounge, even though she had all the necessary membership documentation. Cassandra remembered her mother's expression, not anger, but a deep sense of disappointment and helplessness. Cassandra tightened her grip on her phone. She vowed that she would never let herself or anyone else feel that way ever again. A few minutes later, just as she adjusted her headphones and reopened her presentation, a commotion near the front of the cabin caught her attention. A middle-aged black woman was speaking tensely with Joanna about an unexpected additional fee that she had no prior knowledge of. Cassandra removed her headphones and stood up. This time she knew she couldn't just sit and watch. She walked toward Joanna with calm, measured steps, but her gaze was sharp and unwavering. Her voice was soft, yet carried enough strength for the entire cabin to hear. "Excuse me, is there an issue here?" The middle-aged woman turned around, her eyes filled with gratitude, as though she had just found an ally. Joanna looked momentarily surprised, but quickly masked it with her usual composed but artificial demeanor. "Oh, it's nothing, ma'am. We just need to confirm some information for this passenger." Cassandra tilted her head slightly, her tone firm. "Is that so?" "From what I see, she has all the necessary information and proof of payment. I just want to make sure everything is being handled properly." The atmosphere in the cabin felt like it had frozen. A few passengers turned their heads to exchange glances. Joanna pressed her lips together, visibly uncomfortable, before stepping away to consult with her superior. Cassandra turned to the middle-aged woman and gave her a reassuring nod. "Hold on to that confirmation email. Don't worry, they can't make things difficult for you." The woman's eyes welled up with tears. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would stand up for me." Cassandra returned to her seat, but inside the fire of justice was burning fiercely. She knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The flight eventually landed, but Cassandra Hayes' journey wasn't over. It was a journey of change, courage, and justice. Not everyone has the strength to stand up against injustice, and even fewer can turn their anger into a driving force for positive change. But Cassandra had done just that, proving that when you choose action over silence, you can make a real difference. Cassandra had affirmed that a person's worth isn't determined by the judgmental stares of others, but by how they uphold their dignity and their belief in themselves. Her brave actions not only defended her own integrity, but also inspired many others, people who had perhaps stayed silent for far too long. This wasn't just the story of one woman. It was proof that justice can often begin with small but significant moments. If you feel moved by Cassandra's journey, hit like to show your support. Share if you believe this story should be spread to others. And don't forget to subscribe to follow more meaningful stories about courage and change. Every click you make is a motivation for us to continue sharing more stories that resonate with the human spirit.